Greetings to everybody watching. Let me introduce myself first. My name is Isaac Ritchey, and I'm the current EIC at Central Michigan Life. I say current because I'm actually joined by a few former CM Lifers, as we like to call ourselves, and CMU journalism alums, Ben Solis and Jordyn Hermani, who are currently at Gongwer News, Evan Sasiela, who's at the Ionia Sentinel-Standard, and Kate Carlson, who's at MiBiz. Appreciate you guys coming on and having a little discussion with me. You were all tasked in 2016 to cover the election, and then in 2017 to cover the inauguration of Donald Trump, and then all the events that followed. So to get right into it, let's talk a little bit about logistics, because you decided as a staff to go out to DC to cover the events in person. Who made up that team, and what was the experience like?
Well, I guess I'll start with this one. We didn't really necessarily decide. We were kind of given the opportunity from shout out to our professor, Teresa Hernandez, was able to go with us and take along some students so she took along some of her photography students as well as reporters from CM Life as well. So that's kind of how that whole trip ended up happening, was sort of thanks to her. And so we were like, oh, we get this opportunity. Yeah, we're going to obviously take advantage of this then. As soon as we made sure we had people covering everything from the local angle on campus, and Evan was at the state capitol as well.
So who all from that team went to DC? How many of you?
It was me, Jordan, Kate, and we drove in my car, and we had two other people. We had Greg Wycliffe, who's not here right now, but shout out to Greg, and then we also had Shelby Webster at the same time. So it was an interesting ride, but it was fun.
And how did you guys kind of break up the events that 2 days of constant commotion?
So I know we were all physically at the inauguration, if I remember correctly, right? And we had kind of the night before decided to divvy up different angles. I know that I was a man on the street angle of supporters of the president who had come and what their kind of hopes were and how they were feeling on that day. I just remember it being very cold. But yeah, Kate, what was your angle again?
I was EIC at that time, so I decided to do sort of an overview story of the inauguration and Trump's speech with a little bit of color from a few people I talked to. But I sort of tried to represent a few of the main viewpoints. We were, all of us though, regardless of what we ended up writing, we were all just, I feel talking to really as many people as we could all day. That was kind of how I was going about it, and that's how I go about those big events, especially in college. Just trying to get a decent-ish gauge of the main viewpoints there. So I ended up doing an overview story and a little bit on his speech the day of the inauguration, and then I did more of an overview story of the Women's March on Washington, I believe. Yes. And then yeah, Ben, you did did you do a sidebar of the inauguration day?
I did. I think I did a sidebar on your speech story, because I don't think I wrote much, but I think I wrote that. And then I think I was, you and I were watching the speech pretty attentively, because I think we were writing in the editorial this week or that week. And yeah, so that was mostly, and I helped out on some video and things like that. I was kind of a wingman for most of this, but yeah.
And you guys, we all kind of put our heads together to sort of try to condense the speech and everything into the story. I ended up having my byline on too. So
I remember it being kind of a everybody help out type of situation. I mean, there was only 5 of us there with one photographer really. So it was pretty much anything you can do, and anybody who needs help. So
yeah.
So while you guys were in Washington, you had everybody back home, including Evan, who was given the assignment of covering the Women's March in Lansing. What was that like, Evan, following the inauguration?
It was interesting considering, these are happening throughout the whole country, not just Washington, D.C. So that was our, stay angle. There was like 8,000 people there. That was when Governor Gretchen Whitmer was campaigning, and she spoke at that event. And there was a lot of CMU students there. I remember it was just a, packed event. Just seeing just people from all over the state come down, and it was a great experience.
I know it's weird looking back now in 2021, I guess it is, and nobody's wearing masks at those gatherings. It's just kind of shocking to see those photos. So you guys come back, and that next Monday, you decide as a staff or as an editor group that you're going to compile all your work into that print edition of CM Life. What factored into that decision, and what kind of impact do you think it had on campus?
I don't know how we couldn't, it was such a great opportunity. We were going to do everything we could for it. I think that team in particular, during the election, Jordyn, I don't think you were there. Were you during the election? You were on an internship.
No, during the actual presidential election.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Oh,
because I covered the inauguration, and then like 2 weeks later left for a study abroad in Russia.
That's what it was.
It was. But
so this
no,
was the primary team then. Yeah. Okay.
But
yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
No, it's okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. That was the primary team. I think we made it a decision that we were going to cover this as best as we could. I thought that Kate was EIC, and I think Dominic was EIC at the time, and Kate was managing editor. And we had all decided that we were going to see this through. We had all thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and that's kind of the war story from CM Life. And that didn't happen. And when that didn't happen, a lot of things changed on campus too. And I think when we got that opportunity with Teresa, how could we not throw all of that into one issue? It was an easy decision.
I don't
know. It was, I felt so lucky that we got to go and everything, but at the same time, I was like, the story we should be telling as the local paper is the local angle, like of the students too. So I don't know. It was important that it was just as important having people stay back and cover like the campus angle, what was happening on campus, that kind of thing. So there was that going on too. It was interesting. We were kind of like working remotely from Dave and like some other editors, like having him like proof pages when we were there. That was an interesting thing that now everyone's kind of working remotely. So there was that whole dynamic too. But the local angle I thought was like very important that we made sure we had that as well. So.
And Ben, you brought up that, everybody was kind of anticipating that Clinton was going to win. After the shocking news, after the election, what was the atmosphere like on campus after the inauguration, everything was finalized? Does anybody remember what that was like?
At first it was, just trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I think a lot of people were really convinced that he wasn't going to win, and then he did. And I think it was just a major shock. And then very shortly after that, some of his executive orders started coming down. I remember specifically the travel ban from the Muslim countries. That was extremely controversial, obviously, and there was a protest planned of the Muslim Student Association and any other associated groups, anyone who wanted to come out and protest. So that was kind of the kickoff. That was more of the jump off. And then, this ignited student activism. I think in a lot of ways that this, idea of Black Lives Matter and on-campus activism was of course around before Trump, but when Trump came in, I think it lit the fuse. And there were a lot of actions henceforth, since then. So much so that, when a lot of these groups were planning actions or events or things like that around Black History Month, that was one of the main takeaways from a lot of, students of color and minority students was that, things are different now. We can feel it in the air, and this is going to force us to kind of push back with equal force if things get weird. And I think there were some instances of some racial disputes on campus, things like that, some slurs that were, thrown at students here and there that were reported to campus police. So yeah, it was not overnight, but shortly after he was elected, things got strange on campus.
I
Can
feel
you
like we
talk
were always covering protests just like nonstop after that. There's always something going on in terms of like some kind of like activism event or protest happening.
Yeah.
So you talked about that sparking some of this advocacy, but also as college age voters at the time yourself, do you think that played into the spark or the rise in participation from college aged individuals this past election? Do you think that kind of factors into what we saw this year or this past year?
I definitely think that played a role. I mean, you've seen so heavily, especially with this last election, like promote the vote, like all these different like groups that are trying to work towards like typically non-voting blocks. So like college students who either don't vote because they're, registered at home and they live too far away, or, XYZ. Michigan's voting laws have obviously changed a decent amount since we've been out of college. I'm thinking most recently, like the no reason absentee voting, like now you can cast a ballot for any reason. I mean, I'm just looking at this now, like I feel like you didn't nearly see the amount of like go out and vote type of message it. Like they were there, obviously, but I feel like students kind of just like tuned them out a little bit. I mean, I definitely don't think you can say that same thing now. I definitely think that like young voters, like voters under, I'd probably say like 25 or 30, like realize that they have just as much of a say as like any other voter. And especially now, like I said, in Michigan, have the power to utilize that like weeks in advance of an election. So you don't have to, be in the voting lines, before polls close. You don't have to take a day off work. Like you can just send it in. So
I think a lot of it has to do with the pandemic too, though. Like you can't really compare the two because like I just think everyone has been way more online this past year and like way more tuned into everything just because you have the time, you're at home, you're working from home. It's easy to scroll through your news feed like constantly, that kind of thing. So I think that there is definitely some of that too. But yeah, it of course what we saw and Trump getting elected definitely caused more people to vote as well, I would have to say.
Ben, you were actually covering this year's inauguration from home. Could you compare that a little bit to what you were able to do in 2017?
Well, I mean, being there is a magical experience, even if it's a president that is a controversial one like Donald Trump. I would say that despite everything that was being said about the man then, and obviously continued throughout his presidency, it was nice being there. It was a historic moment. It was a historic moment, whether it was any president, whether it was Clinton or it was going to be him. And I think that the overall tone of his inaugural speech, and this is Trump in 2017, kind of even set more of that historic tone because you have this guy who was going to be a very American first president. That's what he ran on. And his speech was that. It was 50 minutes of just nothing but that. So yeah, I mean, there was something to be missed not being there. I mean, obviously I understand. Even if they would have had people there, I'm not sure my company would have sent me, and I'm not sure I would have gone because of COVID. So it's almost a really good thing that was a very sparsely attended inauguration for Biden this time. But it couldn't be more night and day. The two messages that were said in those addresses. One was very insular and very just singular minded, whereas the Biden address was overarching. It touched on a lot of different points. I think I wrote the story I wrote yesterday, kind of pointed that he certainly looked to a brighter future while also kind of touching on the ills of the past, and not just the past 4 years, but the entire country. And it was just a different experience, easier to transcribe. I'll say that because it was on video, but yeah, it's hard to compare, but it's still magical no matter what you're doing because you get a chance to cover it.
Yeah. So to kind of broaden it and pass it over to you, Evan, Kate, and Jordyn, in 2016 and 2017, you had an election, you had an inauguration, and you had all those protests take place. And a lot of that happened in 2020 and 2021. So how did, as a college student learning journalism, how did covering those things back in 2016 and 2017 help you and prepare you for this past year?
Well, it's a lot about, just being bold. I think you learn a skill just by attending something like that at such a young age, knowing that, you hear this talk about, fake news or whatever, like it really, you get a thick skin from it. So just being able to approach someone on the street randomly and be able to have a conversation with them, that's a skill that you learn from all this that you can take anywhere. Especially during COVID, asking strangers about, whatever. But yeah, it's just, you meet different people, and it's just one experience to go to the next.
I mean, I covered a decent amount of protests throughout the summer for our company. And I mean, knowing what, I don't know, it's almost like college kind of prepared you as a trial run for, as it should, for covering this stuff outside of college. So I mean, it definitely helped you get a better head on your shoulders. Makes you know that like, hey, like, yes, you should be in it and covering things, but like, be smart, be safe, know the type of people to kind of like look for. If you see someone is like visibly like agitated, like probably don't go up and talk to them like immediately. So I mean, it was kind of like a dry run for being able to do this in your job. And I don't know, I'm like thankful for it, thankful for being able to say that like we did have some experience in covering this, because definitely I know that there's bound to be people out there who, they in college maybe covered a very benign, local protest. But I mean, what we saw in Lansing over the summer, you really can't be prepared for something like that until you're in it. But I mean, CMU definitely prepared you for as good as you were gonna get at that point.
Yeah, and to pivot a little bit here, right now journalists are being threatened by the far right, and I'd allude to the siege, the insurrection, the riot, whatever word you want to use to describe what happened on January 6th at Capitol Hill. As professional journalists, what are your thoughts? And do you think this next administration can kind of cool those tensions?
Anybody want to take a crack at it?
I guess here's my thing is that, this mentality against the press existed before Donald Trump. He just put a stamp on it and made that his calling card. I know people who are very liberal minded, who are just as conspiratorial and against mainstream news as the most far right Trump supporter. So this, this mentality doesn't exist in a vacuum. It certainly doesn't exist in a vacuum of political, position. And I think that it's obviously been elevated, certainly by him and his supporters. Do I think it's going to go away with Jen Psaki as the press secretary and Biden in the White House? No, I don't. And I think that there's going to be a weird dichotomy for a little bit of people, expecting the press to really hold Biden accountable, because you can't come off of 4 years of doing nothing but railing, Donald Trump, whether it was, provoked or not, or righteous or not. You gotta have the same level of objectivity. And I think that's going to be the real hard thing here in the next couple of months. Is the press going to be as aggressive with Biden as they were Trump? Maybe they don't have to be, given the situation. But I think that's going to be interesting to watch. But no, I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. Unfortunately.
I did find it.
Repeat the end half of your question again, just to like make sure that I'm like understanding this properly.
Yeah, I was. The second part of my question was, this transition period, like Ben was alluding to. Do you think those tensions will cool off?
And sorry, Evan, I jumped on your toes. Go ahead.
No. think it was interesting yesterday watching the news that Jen Psaki's going to have daily updates Monday through Friday with the press corps. So that should help. I mean, that wasn't something that was happening toward the end of the Trump administration. So, I mean, the press are going to press on that administration. So, I mean, we'll see what happens. But I do think that the Biden administration will be at least a little bit more transparent and try to answer some questions and try to have a working relationship with the media. So that's what I think is going to happen.
I think the deplatforming and removing Trump was the most like meaningful thing and like most important thing, I guess, about maybe helping towards like more of a peaceful transition here. I feel like that was really important. And I feel, pretty confident that Biden probably won't be the same kind of he won't use social media the same way Trump did. I'm pretty sure we can kind of guess that to be true. So I feel like that's kind of one of the biggest things, honestly. Not having a president that like kind of uses social media that way will be really helpful, I think, in easing those tensions.
And I also feel like it's really important to like realize that the individuals who like are very anti-media aren't just going to go away just because Trump has left office, and that they will still exist. And I think what's going to be, to Ben's point, like the big thing moving forward is showing that continued push against any administration, Biden beyond, to dispel this whole idea of fake news, because I mean, that's been whipped up for the last 4 years. Part of it is on the press to make sure that, we show that, there is a difference between facts and opinions. And here we are, reporting the facts and trying to do our part to restore, faith in the fourth estate as it is. So
kind of to wrap up here, what are your hopes for the next, 4 years, 8 years? What do you think we can work on as journalists, as people, as citizens of the United States? What are your hopes?
I hope we learned a lot from covering Trump when he first got elected. I think many mistakes were made by people across the board when it comes to journalism. So I don't know. I hope we learn from that. I hope there's some way to start like regaining some trust in that, or maybe like educating kids and students at an earlier age about like media literacy would help. I don't know. I guess I'm approaching this question more from like a journalistic coverage side.
But I definitely hope media literacy becomes more of a thing moving forward, especially with like, obviously like misinformation has existed prior to the Trump administration, but it was definitely given a megaphone this time around. And I cannot count the amount of people who, my personal like friends and family who I've seen like forward me things that are like just blatantly not true, and like having to, walk through the steps of like, hey, this is why this isn't true. And like, this is, here's some sources that you can check to debunk that. So I hope just our conversation on how, we consume media alters in the future. And I don't know, again, maybe that'll help with deplatforming, especially if we're starting to see the deplatforming of like major misinformation spreaders. But again, too, like that's definitely on all of us to like in the next 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, whatever, beyond. That's saying beyond, yeah. Not saying that Biden's gonna have 12 years in office. No, just like really being on top of, if we really do want to move forward from this chapter in American history, again, it's a little bit on us to be able to explain and call out and, be educated on, what's going on in our political sphere.
Yeah, I think it's important just to keep telling the truth. I mean, that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years. I mean, people have their own opinions about it, but it's important to, be vigilant, be thorough, be fair, be honest with people, and just keep doing your thing. And I hope that, again, echoing what people have said, just that people come around and respect and honor the media for doing the good job and trying to, have the information that they need.
I mean, those are all the same points I would make too. The mission has not changed. The mission won't change no matter who's in office and no matter what challenges we're going to face. I obviously don't have a dog in the fight other than the truth. And I think that's all the same for us too. But I really hope that Biden can get this pandemic under control, not only for our own safety and sanity, but, I can probably speak for all of us saying that I want to get back into the field. I want to get back into the field and report and know that I can talk to someone and have a conversation and be safe and not catch a deadly virus, And I think that's something that I think we've all sorely missed. It's been, for those of us who have been able and fortunate to work from home, it's been a godsend, but it's also just strikingly hard to do this job without that personal connection. You find ways to do it. We've all adapted really well, but being back out, putting boots to the ground, that's what this job is about. And, until this pandemic can get fixed, we're going to keep doing this. So that's my hope.